I watched my sister Vivian glide across the marble floor of the Sinclair estate in her custom Vera Wang wedding gown, diamonds glittering at her throat, and I smiled. Not the bitter smile I'd worn in my previous life, but a genuine satisfied smile. Because this time, I knew exactly what was coming for Marcus Sinclair in 72 hours. The IRS had already begun their audit. The forensic accountants had already found the offshore accounts. And my dear sister, who had stolen everything from me in my first life, was about to marry into a catastrophe of biblical proportions. "You look happy for me," Vivian said, pausing mid-twirl to study my face with those calculating green eyes. "I wasn't sure you would be, given everything." Given everything. What a delicate way to phrase 26 years of systematic abuse, theft, and betrayal that had ultimately killed me. "Of course I'm happy," I said smoothly, adjusting the simple blue bridesmaid dress she'd chosen for me, deliberately unflattering, as always. "You're marrying the man you love. What sister wouldn't be thrilled?" The truth was so much sweeter than she could imagine. When I died 3 months ago in my original timeline, collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition in my studio apartment, working 3 jobs to pay off debts that were never mine to begin with, I'd felt nothing but despair. I'd lost everything: my inheritance, my future, my health, even my identity. Vivian had taken it all, piece by piece, with mother and father's enthusiastic blessing. But then I'd opened my eyes in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling I hadn't seen in 20 years, and I'd understood. I'd been given a second chance. Not just to save myself, but to ensure that everyone who'd destroyed me would face exactly what they deserved. The wedding was in 3 days. The IRS raid was scheduled for 4 days from now, the morning after Marcus and Vivian returned from their honeymoon in Bali. By then, their joint bank accounts would be established. The prenup she'd been so proud of forcing him to sign would be meaningless when it came to tax fraud on this scale. And I would be far, far away from the blast radius, watching it all unfold from the safety I'd carefully constructed. "Sophia!" Mother's voice cut through the bridal suite like a knife. Victoria Ashford swept in, wearing head-to-toe Chanel, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of elegant disdain as she looked me over. "Why are you still here? Didn't I tell you to pick up the flowers from the florist? Vivian's wedding isn't going to coordinate itself." "I was just leaving," I said, grabbing my purse. The same purse I'd owned in my previous life. Though this time I'd been careful to remove the credit cards Vivian would have maxed out by the end of the week. "And Sophia," Mother added as I reached the door, "try not to embarrass us in front of the Sinclairs. I know it's difficult for you, given your limitations, but Vivian's marrying into serious money, real society, the kind of circles you could never navigate." I nodded meekly, playing the role she expected. She had no idea that in my previous life, after they'd taken everything, I'd spent 5 years working as an executive assistant to one of Manhattan's top corporate attorneys. I'd learned exactly how serious money operated. I'd learned about shell corporations and tax shelters and offshore accounts. I'd learned about the kind of fraud that put people in federal prison for decades. And 3 months before I died, I'd processed the paperwork for a confidential IRS informant claim against Marcus Sinclair. The tip had gone nowhere in my original timeline. I'd died before I could follow up, too weak to even make phone calls by the end. But this time, armed with foreknowledge and evidence I'd carefully compiled over the past 3 months, I'd made sure that tip turned into a full-scale investigation. I'd spent weeks carefully feeding information to the right people through anonymous channels: bank statements I found in trash cans, emails I accidentally forwarded from accounts I shouldn't have had access to. A trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to Marcus Sinclair's massive tax evasion scheme. The kind of fraud that carried a penalty of $47 million in back taxes, interest, and penalties, plus potential criminal charges. The flowers were already in my car, of course. I'd picked them up an hour ago, but I drove to a coffee shop instead, ordered a latte, and opened my laptop. The anonymous email account I'd created showed a new message from my contact at the IRS. A whistleblower coordinator who thought I was a concerned accountant who'd stumbled across irregularities while working at Sinclair Industries. Investigation proceeding as scheduled. Raid confirmed for June 15th, 6 o'clock a.m. Evidence sufficient for criminal referral. Thank you for your cooperation. June 15th, 4 days from now. I allowed myself a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction before closing the laptop. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand why this revenge was so perfectly calibrated, so utterly necessary. I was born Sophia Marie Ashford, first daughter to Victoria and Richard Ashford. For the first 6 years of my life, I was an only child. I was loved, or at least I thought I was. Father would lift me onto his shoulders. Mother would brush my hair before bed. Our house in Connecticut was filled with light and laughter. Then Vivian was born. I still remember the day Mother brought her home from the hospital. I was so excited to be a big sister. I'd helped pick out pink blankets and tiny clothes. I'd practiced being gentle with my dolls so I'd know how to hold a real baby. "Isn't she beautiful?" Mother cooed, and I had to admit she was. Golden hair even as an infant, perfect rosebud lips, eyes that would eventually turn that striking green. "She's perfect," 6-year-old me agreed. What I didn't understand then was that in my mother's eyes, perfection was a limited resource. Vivian's arrival didn't expand her capacity to love. It simply redirected every ounce of affection away from me. The change was gradual at first. Mother was tired from caring for a newborn. Father was busy with work. That's what I told myself. But by the time I was 8 and Vivian was 2, the pattern was unmistakable. Vivian wanted my toys. I had to share. I wanted her to stop destroying my homework. I was being selfish. Vivian got new clothes for every season. I got hand-me-downs from cousins. Vivian got ballet lessons and piano lessons and art classes. I got told we couldn't afford extras for both of us. "Vivian is younger," Mother would say. "She needs more attention. You're old enough to understand." I tried so hard to understand. I tried to be the good daughter, the responsible one. I got straight A's in school. I did my chores without being asked. I never complained. I thought if I was good enough, perfect enough, they'd love me again. Instead, my achievements became ammunition. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Father would say to Vivian when she struggled with math. "Sophia makes it look easy." And Vivian would look at me with those green eyes full of resentment, and I'd feel the distance between us grow. By the time I was 16 and she was 10, Vivian had learned exactly how to weaponize our parents' favoritism. She'd accidentally spill juice on my homework the night before it was due. She'd borrow my clothes and return them stained or ripped. She'd tell elaborate lies about things I'd supposedly said or done, and Mother and Father always believed her. "Why would Vivian lie?" Mother would demand when I tried to defend myself. "What could she possibly gain?" Everything, as it turned out. The real turning point came when I was 18. My grandfather, my father's father, had always been kind to me. While my parents lavished attention on Vivian, Grandpa Thomas would take me to museums, help me with college applications, actually listen when I talked about my dreams of becoming an architect. When he died that year, his will was read, and I discovered he'd left me a trust fund. $2 million to be held until I turned 25 or graduated from college, whichever came first. Enough to pay for any university I wanted, to start my own firm someday, to build the life I'd always dreamed of. I cried when the lawyer read that provision, not just because of the money, but because it meant my grandfather had seen me, had believed in me, had wanted me to have opportunities. Mother's face went white. Father looked like he'd been slapped. And Vivian, only 12 at the time, asked in her sweet little voice, "Why did Grandpa leave Sophia all that money? Doesn't he love me too?" That night, I heard them talking in Father's study. "It's not fair to Vivian," Mother was saying. "Thomas always liked Sophia better. It's discrimination." "The will is clear," Father replied. "I don't like it either, but it's done." "Sophia doesn't need that much money," Mother insisted. "She's always been self-sufficient. Vivian is more sensitive. She needs more support. You know how fragile she is." Fragile. Vivian had been caught shoplifting twice by then, had been suspended from school for bullying, and had a habit of throwing screaming tantrums when she didn't get her way. But sure, fragile. I should have known then what was coming. I should have protected myself, but I was 18 and naive and still desperately seeking their approval. I went to Yale, my dream school. The trust fund paid my tuition, room, and board. For the first time in my life, I was free. I thrived. I made friends. I excelled in my architecture classes. I fell in love with a boy named David who actually saw me as a person, not just Vivian's inferior older sister. And then, spring break of my sophomore year, I came home to find that everything had changed. Father had made a series of disastrous investments. His company was on the verge of bankruptcy. The house was in foreclosure. They were drowning in debt. "We need your help," Mother said, sitting me down at the kitchen table. Vivian was 14 by then, beautiful and cruel in equal measure, watching the conversation with barely concealed glee. "Of course," I said immediately. "Whatever you need. I can get a part-time job, send money." "We need more than that," Father interrupted. "We need access to your trust fund." My blood ran cold. "I can't. The terms are very specific. I can't withdraw funds except for education expenses until I graduate or turn 25. "You can take out loans against it," Mother said. "The lawyer said there are ways to access the funds early if you're willing to sign the right paperwork." That would defeat the entire purpose of the trust. The penalties would be enormous. I'd lose nearly half the value. "So you're saying your money is more important than your family?" Vivian's voice was soft, wounded. "We could lose our home, and you won't help us?" They worked on me for 3 days, crying, guilt-tripping, explaining in excruciating detail how I was destroying the family, how selfish I was being, how Grandpa Thomas would be ashamed of me for hoarding wealth while my own parents suffered. I broke. God help me. I broke. I signed the papers. I took out loans against the trust at predatory interest rates. I handed over $800,000 to save my parents' company and house. The remaining $1.2 million was locked away, accruing interest that would mostly go to paying off the loans I'd taken. "Thank you, sweetheart," Father said, actually hugging me for the first time in years. "This is temporary. We'll pay you back as soon as the company recovers." They never paid me back. Not a single dollar. And worse, within 6 months, Father's company did recover. He'd landed a major contract. The house was no longer in danger. They took a vacation to Europe. They bought Vivian a car for her 15th birthday. When I asked about repayment, Mother looked at me like I'd suggested something obscene. "That was a gift," she said coldly. "Family helps family. Or are you going to start charging us interest?" I went back to Yale Hollow and angry. David tried to comfort me, but I pushed him away. I threw myself into my studies, determined to graduate and get access to what remained of my trust so I could finally be free. That summer, I came home to discover Vivian had been struggling with depression and had been seeing an expensive therapist 3 times a week. Also, she'd decided she wanted to attend a prestigious private school that cost $50,000 a year. "We can't afford it with just one income," Mother said. Your father's company is still rebuilding, but you still have money in your trust. You're almost graduated. You don't really need it anymore. Vivian's mental health is at stake." This time, I said no. I said no firmly and repeatedly. I said I'd already given them nearly $1 million and I needed what remained to start my life after graduation. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Father stopped taking my calls. Mother sent me long emails about what a selfish, ungrateful daughter I was. Vivian posted on social media about her rich sister who won't help her own family, and I was bombarded with messages from relatives calling me heartless. But I held firm. I kept my remaining funds locked away. I graduated with honors. I was 22 years old, and I had roughly $600,000 left after penalties and interest. Not the $2 million Grandpa had intended, but enough to start over. I got my first job at a small architecture firm in Manhattan. I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. I was building a life. And then Vivian got sick. Or at least, that's what they told me. She'd been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. She needed experimental treatments that weren't covered by insurance. The costs were astronomical, easily $300,000 or more. "She's your sister," Father said when he called. His voice was broken, defeated. "I know we've had our differences, but she's dying, Sophia. Without this treatment, the doctors give her less than a year." I flew home immediately. Vivian was in the hospital, pale and frail in her bed, hooked up to monitors. Mother was beside her, eyes red from crying. The guilt crashed over me in waves. How could I have been so selfish? How could I have prioritized money over my own sister's life? I signed over $400,000 for her treatment. Nearly everything I had left. I kept $200,000 for emergencies and moved into an even smaller apartment to make ends meet. The experimental treatment was a miracle. Within 3 months, Vivian was in full remission. Within 6 months, she was healthier than ever, glowing and vibrant and posting Instagram photos from beach vacations. It took me 2 years to discover the truth. There had never been any autoimmune disorder. The diagnosis was fake. The experimental treatment center was a spa in Arizona that my parents had paid off to provide fake medical records. Vivian had been perfectly healthy the entire time. They had stolen $400,000 from me with an elaborate con. I found out because I'd been doing my own research into autoimmune disorders, wanting to understand my sister's condition, and I stumbled across a support forum. On a whim, I posted about her specific diagnosis and treatment center, and someone responded immediately. That's a known scam. Multiple people have reported that facility for insurance fraud. There is no such disorder as autoimmune cascade syndrome. It doesn't exist. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I hired a private investigator, spending money I couldn't afford, and got the proof. Medical records from Vivian's actual doctor showing she'd never had any serious illness. Financial records showing payments from my parents to the fake treatment center. Emails between mother and the facility's director discussing the presentation of Vivian's fake illness. When I confronted them, they didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. "You had money you didn't need," Mother said simply. "Vivian's future is more important than your pride." "You committed fraud," I said, voice shaking. "You stole from me." "We're your family," Father replied. "What's ours is yours, and what's yours is ours. That's how family works." "Then you won't mind giving it back." Mother laughed. Actually laughed. "It's already spent. Vivian's education, her apartment, her car, investments in her future. You should be happy. You helped your sister become the woman she is today." The woman she was, a spoiled, manipulative narcissist who'd been taught that the world owed her everything and that I existed solely to finance her dreams. I cut them off, blocked their numbers, refused their emails, moved apartments without leaving a forwarding address. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next 3 years, they found ways to destroy me that I never could have anticipated. Father still had connections in the business world, and suddenly doors that had been open to me slammed shut. Job applications went unanswered. Projects I'd worked on were reassigned. A promotion I'd been promised evaporated. Then the debt started appearing in my name. Credit cards I'd never opened. Loans I'd never taken. Someone, Vivian, it had to be Vivian, had stolen my identity and run up hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. By the time I discovered it, the damage was done. My credit was ruined. Collection agencies harassed me daily. I filed police reports, but nothing happened. Identity theft is hard to prove, especially when the thief is your own sister who has access to all your personal information. And my parents provided alibis, claiming Vivian had been with them during the times the accounts were opened. I worked 3 jobs trying to pay off debt that wasn't mine, trying to rebuild my life from nothing. I stopped eating regularly, I stopped sleeping, my health deteriorated, and through it all, I'd see Vivian's Instagram posts, her in designer clothes, her at expensive restaurants, her buying a condo in Manhattan with mother and father beaming proudly beside her, all of it financed by what she'd stolen from me. The final blow came 6 months before I died. I'd been working as a junior architect at a firm I actually loved. It was the first good thing in my life in years. Then Vivian showed up at my office. "We need to talk," she said, sliding into the chair across from my desk like she owned it. She was wearing Gucci, I noticed. Her engagement ring, a massive diamond from some hedge fund boyfriend, caught the light. "I don't have anything to say to you." "Mother and father are retiring. They're planning to sell the Connecticut house and split the proceeds between us." She examined her manicured nails. 50-50, that seems fair, doesn't it? After everything you've stolen from me? No, it doesn't. She smiled. That's what I thought you'd say. So I have a proposition. Sign away your claim to the house. agree that I should inherit it all, and I'll make sure the identity theft stops. I'll even pay off the outstanding debt. All of it. You'll be free. And if I don't, then I'll make sure you never work as an architect in this city again. Father has friends everywhere. One word from him, and you're blacklisted. She leaned forward. You've been barely surviving for 3 years now. How much longer can you keep this up? You look terrible, by the way. Have you seen a doctor recently? I hadn't. I couldn't afford one. Sign the papers, Sophia. Take the deal. It's more than you deserve anyway. You've always been jealous of me. This is your chance to finally let go of that bitterness and move on with your life. The gaslighting was breathtaking. She'd stolen everything from me, and somehow I was the bitter, jealous one. But I was desperate, exhausted, broken. I signed the papers. Vivian was true to her word. The identity theft stopped and the major debts were paid off. But what she didn't mention was that she'd been the one committing the identity theft all along, and the debts she paid off were only the ones that could be traced back to her crimes. The legitimate debts I'd accumulated from trying to survive, from hiring lawyers to fight the fraud, from medical bills for my declining health, those remained. I kept working my 3 jobs, kept surviving day by day. And then one morning, I simply didn't wake up. Heart failure, the coroner would later report, brought on by chronic stress, malnutrition, and exhaustion. I was 29 years old. The last thing I remember from that life was lying on my apartment floor, too weak to reach my phone, thinking that at least it was finally over. At least I wouldn't have to fight anymore. And then I woke up in my childhood bedroom, 16 years old again, staring at that familiar ceiling. The first thing I did was cry. Great, heaving sobs of relief and rage and grief for the life I'd lost. The second thing I did was check the date on my phone. March 3rd, 2 weeks before Grandpa Thomas would die and leave me that trust fund. I had been given an impossible gift. The chance to do everything differently. The advantage of Rebirth is knowledge. I knew every trap they'd set for me. I knew every lie they'd tell. I knew exactly how far they'd go to bleed me dry, and this time I had the power to stop it. I spent those 2 weeks with Grandpa Thomas, really spent time with him in a way I hadn't appreciated in my first life. I told him I loved him. I thanked him for always seeing me. And 3 days before he died, I had a conversation with him in his study. Grandpa, I said carefully, I need to talk to you about the trust fund. He looked up from his book, surprised. How did you know about that? I found the paperwork. I wasn't snooping, he held up a hand. It's fine. Yes, I'm leaving you money for college and beyond. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Sophia. You'll do something meaningful with it. That's what I wanted to talk about. I need you to make the terms absolutely ironclad. I need it structured so that no one, not even me, can access it early or take loans against it. It all has to wait until I'm 25 or graduated, with no exceptions. Grandpa frowned. That's pretty restrictive. What if you have an emergency? Then I'll handle it another way. Please, Grandpa, trust me on this. Something in my voice must have convinced him, because he called his lawyer that afternoon and made the changes. When he died 3 days later, the trust was locked down tight. There would be no loans, no early access, no ways for my family to convince me to hand over the money. I grieved genuinely for Grandpa. He'd been the only family member who'd truly loved me. But I also felt a grim satisfaction. The first trap had been dismantled. At the will reading, when Mother and Father realized they couldn't pressure me into accessing the funds, they were furious. But there was nothing they could do. The money was protected. This is so unfair to Vivian, Mother hissed as we left the lawyer's office. Your grandfather clearly didn't consider her needs. She's 12, I said calmly. She doesn't have any needs beyond what you're already providing. I went to Yale as planned, but this time I kept my family at arm's length. When Father's company started failing my sophomore year, I pretended I didn't know. I was so busy with school that I barely answered their calls. When they finally told me about their financial crisis, I expressed sympathy but firmly explained that my trust was inaccessible. But the lawyer said, Father started, the lawyer is wrong. Grandpa Thomas made very specific provisions. I can't touch the money until I graduate or turn 25. There are no exceptions. They tried. They sent lawyers after me. They created emergencies. But the trust was ironclad, and I'd learned in my first life to be suspicious of every crisis they manufactured. When Vivian's fake illness came around, I was ready. I'd actually befriended a doctor at Yale who specialized in autoimmune disorders, and when my parents sent me the diagnosis, I had him review it. "This isn't real," he told me immediately. "This condition doesn't exist. Someone's trying to scam you." I confronted them over speakerphone with my doctor friend as a witness. The stammering, the eventual admission, the rage when they realized I wouldn't be their cash cow this time. It was almost satisfying. I graduated with my degree and my full trust fund, well, what remained after legitimate educational expenses. Roughly $1.6 million. I'd protected it, but I wasn't done. Not nearly done. See, in my first life, I'd been so focused on my own survival that I'd never thought about offensive maneuvers. I'd been defensive, reactive, always trying to patch holes while they kept drilling new ones. This time, I went on the offense. I became very interested in my family's finances. Where was the money coming from to fund Vivian's lifestyle? How were my parents managing to maintain their house and take expensive vacations? Father's company was moderately successful, but not enough to explain their spending. It took me 6 months of careful investigation, but I found it. They'd been using the house I'd signed away, the one worth $2.5 million, as collateral for increasingly risky investments. They'd taken out a massive second mortgage. They were leveraged to the hilt, living on borrowed money and borrowed time. And Vivian had set her sights on a prize that would solve all their problems: Marcus Sinclair. Marcus was 32, handsome, and supposedly worth $500 million from his tech startup that had gone public 5 years earlier. He was exactly the kind of target Vivian had been groomed to pursue: wealthy, successful, and too arrogant to see through her performance of being the perfect woman. In my first life, I'd been too busy drowning to pay attention to Vivian's marriage. I vaguely remembered her wedding. I hadn't been invited. And then something about a divorce a few years later. I'd been too focused on my own survival to care. But now, with time to actually research Marcus Sinclair, I discovered something fascinating. The man was a fraud. His company was built on inflated valuations and creative accounting. His personal wealth was mostly smoke and mirrors, and he was being investigated by the IRS for hiding assets offshore and evading tens of millions in taxes. In my first life, that investigation had apparently gone nowhere. But why? I dug deeper, accessing records through my job at the corporate law firm where I now worked, using the connections I'd built over 5 years of being an actual competent professional instead of a desperate, dying woman. The answer was simple. Marcus had gotten tipped off. Someone in his company had warned him about the investigation, and he'd managed to cover his tracks, pay a settlement, and escape criminal charges. He'd still been wealthy enough to satisfy Vivian, and their marriage had lasted 5 years before they'd divorced, with Vivian getting a substantial settlement, naturally. But what if he didn't get tipped off? What if the investigation proceeded unimpeded? What if all his assets were frozen and seized before Vivian had time to secure her prenup's protections? The idea bloomed in my mind like a dark flower. Beautiful and terrible. I started collecting evidence. Thanks to my position at the law firm, I had access to certain databases and resources. I found financial records that Marcus had been careless with. I found shell corporations and offshore accounts. I found a pattern of fraud that spanned a decade. And then, 3 months before I died in my original timeline, I'd packaged it all up and sent it anonymously to the IRS. That tip had gone nowhere because I died before I could follow up, before I could provide the corroborating evidence they needed. But this time I was alive. I was well. And I had 3 months to make absolutely certain that the IRS had everything they needed to destroy Marcus Sinclair. I fed them information carefully. Bank statements that mysteriously appeared in public records, emails from a concerned employee, anonymous tips called from burner phones. I built an overwhelming case, and I made sure the timeline would be perfect. The raid would happen 4 days after Vivian's wedding. And now, watching her twirl in her wedding dress, knowing she thought she was about to secure her fortune and her future, I felt something close to peace. "You really think this will work?" my friend Jennifer asked me later that evening. She was one of the few people who knew the truth. Not about my rebirth, but about my family's abuse. You think they'll really lose everything? I know they will, I said. Marcus has been evading $47 million in taxes. The penalties alone will bankrupt him. The IRS will seize his accounts, his properties, his assets. And because Vivian will be married to him and they'll have joint accounts by then. She'll be liable too, Jennifer finished, eyes wide. Oh my God. The prenup she negotiated only protects her from losing money in a divorce. It doesn't protect her from federal tax liability. If anything, it makes it worse. She'll have pushed for joint accounts to maximize her access to his money, which means the IRS can claim she benefited from the fraud. That's brilliant. That's justice, I corrected. She spent her entire life stealing from me. Now she's about to marry into debt so deep she'll never escape it. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Sunny, warm, with a gentle breeze. The kind of day Vivian had always dreamed of. The Sinclair estate was decorated with thousands of white roses. A string quartet played. 200 guests filled the chairs on the south lawn. I wore my bridesmaid dress without complaint. I smiled for photos. I helped Vivian with her train. I played the role of the supportive sister perfectly. Thank you for this, Vivian said unexpectedly as we waited for her cue to walk down the aisle. I know we've had our differences, but it means a lot that you're here. For just a moment, I wondered if she actually believed that. If she'd gaslit herself so thoroughly that she genuinely thought our differences were normal sibling rivalry and not systematic financial and emotional abuse. Of course, I said. You're my sister. The ceremony was beautiful. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, arrogant and confident. Vivian looked like a princess. They exchanged vows about love and commitment and forever. Mother cried. Father beamed proudly. I thought about the IRS agents who were, at that very moment, finalizing their raid plans. I thought about the forensic accountants who were preparing to seize every asset Marcus owned. I thought about the federal prosecutors who were building a criminal case. And I smiled. The reception was lavish. A 10-piece band, a 5-course meal, champagne flowing like water. Marcus gave a speech about how lucky he was to have found Vivian, how she was the woman of his dreams. Vivian gave a speech about finally getting everything she deserved. That last part was truer than she knew. I left the reception early, citing work in the morning. No one tried to stop me. I drove back to my apartment in Manhattan, a nice place in a good neighborhood, paid for with money I'd earned and invested wisely, and poured myself a glass of wine. 3 more days. On day 2, I received a text from Vivian in Bali. Paradise. Marcus rented a whole private island. This is the life I was meant to live. I sent back a heart emoji. On day 3, Mother called. I'm so relieved Vivian finally married well. After all our struggles, she deserves this happiness. Some people are just meant for better things. I'm happy for her, I said truthfully. You know, Sophia, there might be hope for you, too. Maybe Marcus has some single friends, wealthy men, though you'd have to improve your appearance and attitude. Successful men don't want bitter, difficult women. I'll keep that in mind, Mother. I hung up and marked the date on my calendar. Day 4. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., 15 IRS agents would arrive at the Sinclair estate with seizure warrants. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. At 6:45 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. At 7:30, Mother called. I didn't answer. At 8:15, Father called. Voicemail. At 9 o'clock, my phone started blowing up with texts. Mother. Call me immediately. Emergency. Father. We need to talk now. Unknown number. This is Victoria Ashford. Pick up your phone. I waited until 10 a.m., then called Mother back. Where have you been? She shrieked. We've been trying to reach you for hours. I was in a meeting. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? The IRS raided Marcus's estate this morning. They've seized everything. The accounts are frozen. Vivian can't access any money. Marcus is being charged with tax fraud. Oh my God, I said, injecting appropriate shock into my voice. That's terrible. Is Vivian okay? Okay? She's devastated. She's stranded in Bali. The credit cards don't work. She can't even pay for her hotel. Can't Marcus's family help? His family is as broke as he is. Everything was in his name. The IRS has seized it all. $47 million in back taxes and penalties. $47 million. I can't even imagine. But surely Vivian is protected? She just married him. She wasn't involved in his business dealings. A long silence. Then quietly, viciously, she signed papers. Marcus had her sign papers to merge their finances, to put her name on his accounts for estate planning. The IRS is saying she's liable for his tax debt as a spouse. Oh, this was even better than I'd hoped. But she has a prenup, right? The prenup is meaningless for tax liability. Don't you understand? She's married to a man who owes the federal government $50 million. She's liable for half of it. Her accounts are frozen. Her credit is destroyed. Everything she owns can be seized. I let the silence stretch, counting to 5 before responding. I don't know what to say. How can I help? We need money to get her home from Bali, to hire lawyers, to fight this. You have your trust fund. No. The word came out flat and final. What do you mean, no? Mother's voice went dangerously quiet. I mean, no. I'm not giving you money. Not this time. Your sister is stranded in a foreign country. She needs help. She can ask Marcus's wealthy friends, or she can call the embassy. I'm sure they have protocols for American citizens in financial distress. How can you be so cruel? This is your sister. My sister who stole my identity and ruined my credit? Who conspired with you to defraud me out of my inheritance? Who has spent her entire life making sure I had nothing so she could have everything? That sister? I heard Mother's sharp intake of breath. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I know about the fake illness. I know about the identity theft. I know about every lie, every manipulation, every dollar you stole from me. And I'm done. If you don't help Vivian right now, you are no longer part of this family. Good, I said. I stopped being part of this family the day you decided Vivian's wants were more important than my needs. Goodbye, Mother. I hung up and blocked her number, then Father's, then Vivian's. The satisfaction was indescribable. Over the next few days, I watched the story unfold through news reports and social media. Marcus Sinclair's arrest made headlines. Tech CEO charged with massive tax fraud. The details were damning. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations in Delaware, falsified business expenses, and a decade of systematic evasion. Vivian's face appeared in several photos, the beautiful bride who'd married into a nightmare. Some outlets were sympathetic. Most were not, especially when it emerged that she'd been added to his accounts mere days before the raid, suggesting possible conspiracy to hide assets. I knew she wasn't that smart. She'd just been greedy and wanted the access to her money as quickly as possible. But the optics were terrible. Her Instagram, once a glossy parade of luxury, went dark. Then it was deleted entirely. I received one email from Father that got through before I blocked that address too. You did this. I don't know how, but you did this. You've destroyed your sister's life out of jealousy and spite. You're a monster. I deleted it without responding. Let him think what he wanted. He had no proof, and even if he did, what was he going to do? Report me to the IRS for accurately reporting tax fraud? That would be a first. Through a former colleague at the law firm, I kept tabs on the legal proceedings. Marcus was offered a plea deal, plead guilty to multiple counts of tax evasion, pay the full amount owed plus penalties, and serve 5 years in federal prison. He took it because the alternative was a trial where he'd face 20 years. Vivian tried to negotiate her own deal. She hired expensive lawyers, on credit, since all her assets were frozen, and tried to prove she'd had no knowledge of Marcus's fraud. The problem was those signatures on the account transfers. The problem was the timing. The problem was that she'd bragged on social media about finally getting everything I deserve and posted pictures of herself spending lavishly on Marcus's money. The prosecutors offered her a deal too: plead guilty to conspiracy to evade taxes, pay her portion of the liability, and serve 18 months in prison. She refused. She insisted on going to trial. She was convinced a jury would see her as an innocent victim. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay $23.5 million in restitution, half of Marcus's tax liability, since they'd filed jointly for the brief period they were married. $23.5 million. She had approximately $47,000 in accessible assets after the seizures. The math was laughably impossible. She'd be in debt for the rest of her life. Every paycheck she ever earned would be garnished. Every asset she'd ever acquired would be at risk of seizure. She'd declared bankruptcy, but that didn't discharge federal tax debt. She was financially destroyed, permanently and irrevocably. My parents tried to help her. They hired lawyers, mortgaged the house again, spent every dollar they had on her defense and appeals. It didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The law was clear. And when the money ran out, when the house was foreclosed on, when they had nothing left to give, Vivian finally understood what I'd lived through in my first life. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to witness it in person. But I did watch the news coverage of the sentencing. Vivian in an orange jumpsuit, tears streaming down her face, begging the judge for mercy, mother sobbing in the gallery, father looking 10 years older, hollow and broken. The judge was unmoved. You married a wealthy man and immediately sought access to his finances. When those finances turned out to be built on fraud, you claimed ignorance. But ignorance is not innocence, Ms. Sinclair. You benefited from these crimes. You must face the consequences. 3 years in federal prison, $23.5 million in debt, a felony record that would follow her forever, justice. But I wasn't done yet. Remember, they'd destroyed my credit in my first life through identity theft. They'd ruined my reputation. They'd stolen from me repeatedly and systematically. Prison for Vivian was satisfying, but it wasn't complete. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd done to me. I wanted them to live it. So I made some calls. See, Father's company had survived in my first life partly because I'd given them $800,000. But mostly because of a contract he'd landed with a major manufacturer. That contract was up for renewal, and the decision-maker was someone I'd gone to Yale with, someone who is now a good friend. I need you to understand something about Richard Ashford, I told James over drinks one evening. He's not the man he presents himself as. He's committed fraud, manipulated his own children, and built his life on lies. I showed him the evidence. Not about Marcus, that was separate. About my parents. The fake medical diagnosis they'd used to defraud me. The identity theft they'd enabled. Financial irregularities in Father's business that I'd uncovered. James's expression grew darker as he reviewed the documents. This is... Jesus, Sophia, I'm sorry you went through this. I survived, but I'm asking you as a friend, don't renew his contract. Don't let him profit anymore. He needs to face consequences. The contract wasn't renewed. Father's company lost its largest client. Within 6 months, he was filing for bankruptcy. I made similar calls to other people in positions to affect their lives, always with evidence, always with truth. I wasn't lying or manipulating. I was simply ensuring that the right people knew who the Ashfords really were. Mother had worked as a social coordinator for an elite charity organization. I made sure the board knew about her history of fraud. She was quietly let go. Their reputation in their social circle collapsed. The bankruptcy and Vivian's imprisonment were embarrassing enough, but add in the whispers about who they really were, what they'd really done, and they became pariahs. They lost the house, of course. They moved into a small apartment in a bad neighborhood. Father took a job at a car dealership. Mother worked retail. The contrast to their former life was stark and humiliating. And through it all, they had to watch Vivian sit in prison, counting down the days of her sentence, knowing that when she got out, she'd still owe $23.5 million she could never pay. I let a year pass before I reached out. I sent Mother a letter, paper, through the mail, because I knew all her electronic accounts were monitored by the IRS looking for hidden assets. Dear Mother, I thought you should know I'm doing well. I bought a house in Connecticut, not far from where we used to live, actually. 4 bedrooms, beautiful garden. I paid cash. My architecture firm is thriving. We just won a contract to design a museum in Boston. My personal net worth is approximately $4 million now, thanks to wise investments. I'm getting married next spring. His name is David. Remember him from Yale? We reconnected. He's kind and brilliant, and he actually loves me for who I am, not what I can give him. I thought you'd want to know that I'm living the life you always told me I couldn't have. The life you said I didn't deserve. The life you sacrificed me to give to Vivian. I also thought you should know. I was the one who reported Marcus to the IRS. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize his fraud? I worked in corporate law for 5 years. I knew exactly what he was doing. I knew the investigation was coming, and I made sure Vivian married him right before everything collapsed. You taught me that family comes first, that we sacrifice for each other, that blood is thicker than water. But you were wrong about which family member deserved the sacrifice. I hope Vivian is enjoying prison. I hope you're enjoying poverty. I hope Father is enjoying the knowledge that everything he built was destroyed by his own actions. You took everything from me once. I made sure you could never do it again. Don't contact me. I've built a life you can never touch, surrounded by people who actually love me. You're not part of it. You never will be. Goodbye, Sophia. I never received a response. I didn't expect one. 3 years passed. I married David in a ceremony surrounded by friends who'd chosen to be my family. I built my architecture firm into a respected name in the industry. I bought that house and filled it with light and love and everything my childhood home had lacked. I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. When Vivian was released from prison, I didn't acknowledge it. I knew from public records that she moved in with our parents in their tiny apartment. I knew she got a job as a waitress, one of the few places that would hire a felon. I knew she was making $400 a month in garnishment payments toward a debt she'd never finish paying. I knew, and I didn't care. Then 5 years after the trial, I received an unexpected call. A lawyer representing the Ashford family, though not a very good lawyer based on how he handled himself. Ms. Chen, he said, using my married name, I'm calling on behalf of your parents and your sister. They're facing significant financial hardship and medical challenges. Your father has been diagnosed with heart disease and can't afford proper treatment. They're requesting that you, as a family member, provide assistance. I let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. No, I said simply, I don't think you understand the severity. I understand perfectly, and my answer is no. They're not my family. They made that clear 25 years ago when they decided I existed solely to fund Vivian's dreams. I owe them nothing. I will give them nothing. If they're facing hardship, they can apply for public assistance like everyone else. That's very cold, Ms. Chen. That's very practical, I corrected. Tell them that if they contact me again, I'll get a restraining order. And tell Vivian that if she ever tries to use my identity again, I'll have her sent back to prison for parole violation. Goodbye. I hung up and blocked that number too. David found me in the kitchen afterward, pouring a glass of wine with shaking hands. They called? He asked gently. He knew the whole story. I'd told him everything, including the parts I could never prove about my rebirth. He believed me, or at least he loved me enough to accept it. They want money. Father's sick. They're broke. They want me to save them again. What did you say? I said no. I took a sip of wine, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders, and it felt good. It felt right. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. I'm proud of you. Are you? I condemned my own father to inadequate medical care. I'm leaving my sister to drown in debt she'll never escape. Some people would call that cruel. Some people don't know what they did to you. Both times. He turned me to face him. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm, especially not when they're the ones who burned you in the first place. He was right. I knew he was right. But still, sometimes I wondered, was I any better than them? I'd orchestrated Vivian's downfall deliberately. I'd destroyed my parents' lives systematically. I'd used knowledge they couldn't possibly have to ensure their ruin. Then I'd remember lying on my apartment floor in my first life, too weak to move, dying at 29 because they'd bled me dry. I'd remember the years of abuse and manipulation and theft. I'd remember how they'd laughed when I confronted them, how they'd felt entitled to everything I had, and the guilt would fade. They'd made their choices. They'd decided that Vivian's happiness was worth more than my life. They'd decided that wealth and status mattered more than honesty or love or basic human decency. I'd simply made sure they faced consequences for those choices. Was it revenge? Absolutely. Was it justice? I believed so. Was it fair? Perhaps not. But then what they did to me wasn't fair either. At least this time, the punishment fit the crime. 10 years after Vivian's release from prison, I received one final piece of news through a former colleague. Vivian had gotten married again, to a man she'd met at the restaurant where she worked. He was a mechanic, solidly middle class, apparently a good man who knew about her past and loved her anyway. I was surprised to feel nothing, not satisfaction at her continued struggles, not anger at her finding some measure of happiness, just nothing. She was no longer part of my story. None of them were. I had built something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd tried to destroy. I had a husband who cherished me, a career I loved, friends who were my chosen family. I'd recently learned I was pregnant, a daughter, the ultrasound suggested. I thought about what kind of mother I would be, what lessons I would teach my daughter. And I knew with absolute certainty that I would never make her feel the way my parents made me feel, that I would never pit her against a sibling, that I would never treat her as a resource to be exploited. I would break the cycle. I would be better. And in being better, in building a life of genuine love and success, I had already won. The ultimate revenge wasn't Vivian's imprisonment or my parents' poverty. It wasn't the destroyed reputation or the crushing debt. The ultimate revenge was my happiness. It was living well while they barely survived. It was building everything they'd said I couldn't have. It was proving that their abuse hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something stronger. I stood in the nursery David and I had prepared, running my hand over the crib we'd assembled together, and I smiled. In my first life, I died alone and broken at 29. In this life, at 35, I was whole. That was justice. That was revenge. That was victory, and it was more than enough. 15 years after my rebirth, 15 years after that wedding where Vivian married Marcus Sinclair and walked into the trap I'd set, I received one last communication. A letter forwarded through my lawyer. Vivian had learned not to contact me directly. I debated throwing it away unread, but curiosity won. The handwriting was Vivian's, but shakier than I remembered. Sophia, I know you'll probably throw this away. I know I have no right to contact you, but I'm dying, ovarian cancer, stage 4, and I wanted to say something before I go. I've spent 15 years thinking about what happened, about the trial, the investigation, everything. It took me a long time to understand that it wasn't bad luck. It wasn't Marcus's fault. It was you. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you knew. But I know you orchestrated my downfall as surely as I orchestrated yours in all those years before. And here's what I've realized. I deserved it. I was a monster to you. We all were. We used you. We abused you. We took everything you had and then blamed you for not giving more. And I never even felt guilty because I'd been taught from childhood that I mattered more than you did, that your purpose was to serve my needs. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what it feels like to be powerless, to be used, to lose everything and have no one care. I heard you have a daughter and a son now too. I hope you're a better mother than ours was. I hope you break the cycle. I hope your children never know what it's like to be valued only for what they can provide. You won, Sophia. You won completely. And I'm glad you did, because I finally understand that you deserve to win all along. I'm sorry for all of it. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry. Vivian. I read the letter 3 times, then I burned it in the fireplace and scattered the ashes. An apology from someone dying didn't undo 26 years of abuse. Understanding didn't erase what she'd done. Regret didn't refund the money she'd stolen or return the years of my life she'd destroyed. But still, as I watched the paper curl and blacken in the flames, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness. I would never forgive them. But closure. Finally, Truly closure. She'd understood. In the end, she'd understood exactly what she'd done to me, and she'd lived long enough to experience a fraction of the powerlessness and pain she'd inflicted. That was enough. I turned away from the fireplace and walked into my living room, where David was helping our daughter with homework while our son built a tower of blocks. My home, my family, my life. I'd been given a second chance, and I'd used it to ensure that justice was served and that I would never be a victim again. I'd won. And unlike Vivian's temporary victories built on stolen money and manipulated affection, my victory was permanent, built on my own merit, my own work, my own choices. This was the life Grandpa Thomas had wanted for me. This was the future I'd fought for twice, and it was beautiful. When Vivian died 3 months later, I didn't attend the funeral. I sent flowers, white roses, just like her wedding, with no card. I hoped she understood the message that I'd remembered, that I'd never forgotten, that justice, delayed but inevitable, had finally come full circle. The story of my family's destruction was complete, and the story of my victory had only just begun.